Welcome to the Explainer. Today we are unpacking a really fascinating and definitely unconventional take on modern romance. What if dating isn't some Disney fairy tale, but actually a psychological battlefield? Well, according to the framework we're looking at today, the physical weapons of the past have basically just been replaced by emotional manipulation and strategic posturing. We're going to take a purely analytical look at what happens when you apply ancient military strategy directly to modern love. Think about ancient warfare for a second. Warriors used to rely on swords, shields, and horses, right? Well, this source argues that today's combatants use luxury perfume, perfectly calculated smiles, and flawlessly curated social media filters. The core argument here is that the arena hasn't disappeared at all. It's just evolved. It's evolved into this complex space of emotional maturity and psychological positioning. To really unpack this tactical playbook, we're going to hit 6 key areas: the modern battlefield, illusions and social masks, silence and emotional control, boundaries and adaptability, observing behavior over words, and finally, strategies to win without fighting. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the modern battlefield of love and understanding the terrain. The source leans heavily on this famous Sun Tzu quote to point out a massive flaw in how we date today. It gives a really objective reason for why so many people are just failing in this modern terrain. And spoiler alert, it's not about physical weakness. It is entirely about a lack of situational awareness. Offering absolute unearned loyalty on day one without scouting the person first, according to this framework, that is not romance. That is literally a fatal tactical error. And that brings us directly to the concept of the terrain. Just like a general would never send soldiers blindly into an unknown physical landscape, you have to scout the psychological landscape. What are their actual values? What are their principles? The advice here is simple. Do not commit your emotional resources until you know the ground you're standing on. You absolutely have to understand the emotional landscape you're stepping into before fully committing. Moving on to Section 2, illusion and social masks, or the art of deception. This ancient maxim is applied straight to the modern dating market, which the source argues is heavily layered with deception. Perfectly curated online personas, heavily filtered photos, and those perfectly rehearsed conversational charms. That's modern camouflage, folks. It's an environment where almost everyone is actively managing the perception of who they are. This playbook actually calls it tactical illusion. When someone posts their absolute best, highly edited photo online, they aren't necessarily lying, but they are absolutely positioning themselves to influence you. And here is the most fascinating takeaway from this section. Responding to these calculated illusions with total, hard-on-your-sleeve honesty, the source calls that tactical suicide. You are essentially bringing raw sincerity to a high-stakes game of strategy. Let's look at Section 3, silence and emotional control, and how to retain leverage. So if raw honesty isn't the go-to weapon, what is? Well, the argument is that silence is the sword of the modern era. The moment you spill all your insecurities, your deep emotions, and your future plans, you completely lose your unpredictability, and along with it, your leverage. Maintaining some mystery isn't about being cruel or playing hard to get. In this framework, it's a fundamental survival tactic to prevent yourself from being easily controlled. You see, opponents in a relationship setting often expect, and frankly exploit, emotional instability. They know exactly how to handle a big reaction. The so-called weak response is to argue, react instantly, and feed right into the chaos. But true dominance? That comes from remaining completely silent and just absorbing the chaos without giving a reaction. If you don't react, you simply cannot be manipulated. This brings us to Section 4, boundaries and adaptability, and setting the frame. Drawing on that classic philosophy of being like water, the source points out that individuals have to adapt to the emotional landscape, just like water shapes itself to the ground. But wait, this absolutely does not mean becoming a pushover. The material makes it crystal clear that you must never sacrifice your core principles just to gain someone's approval. Instead, you enforce your boundaries quietly. Firm boundaries naturally command respect, whereas emotional desperation, that just invites chaos. And this brilliantly illustrates how emotional fluidity works in practice. Imagine a conflict arises. Your partner complains. Instead of immediately fighting back, you just listen, neutrally, without getting defensive at all. If they then withdraw to test you, you don't chase them. You stand your ground. You are effectively redirecting their energy in conflict without ever engaging in an exhausting, direct confrontation. Now for Section 5, Observing Behavior Over Words, which is all about intelligence gathering. Here, the source issues a huge warning against something called a tactical mismatch. This happens when you try to use pure logic and reasoning to fight against emotional maneuvers. It's completely futile. It's honestly like bringing a cannon to a poetry reading. Instead of logically over-explaining yourself, the winning strategy is to deploy emotional neutrality. Your calm, grounded presence will always win out over a frantic logical explanation. So how exactly do you build a modern spy network in the dating world? By totally ignoring what people say. Forget the verbal promises, ignore the spoken commitments, and the clever justifications. Instead, you become an observer of hidden behavioral patterns. Watch how they treat a waiter. Listen closely to how they talk about their exes. Observe what they do when they think you aren't looking. At the end of the day, behavior is the only reliable data. Finally, we reach Section 6, Strategies to Win Without Fighting, the Supreme Art of War. According to the ultimate conclusion of this source, the goal of applying this tactical playbook is never ever to aggressively control or manipulate your partner. Instead, the supreme art is to master yourself so thoroughly that any attempts to manipulate you simply fail. You win by becoming entirely unshakable. Let's see how this builds. It requires stepping out of the role of the soldier and into the role of the general. A soldier runs entirely on emotion, gets highly defensive, and just reacts blindly to whatever happens on the battlefield. A general, on the other hand, a general uses emotion as a calculated tool, plans moves way ahead of time, and controls the mental weather of the interaction. They know exactly when to advance and exactly when to calmly retreat. So, how do you achieve this general-like state? You become a little less predictable. You refrain from broadcasting all your internal plans and anxieties. But most importantly, you detach completely from that desperate need for constant validation, and you maintain strict emotional discipline. It's all about cultivating an aura of mystery and respect, completely organically, without ever resorting to petty, toxic mind games. And this brings us to the absolute core takeaway of the entire analysis. In this modern battlefield of love, illusion, and strategy, the real enemy isn't the person sitting across from you at the dinner table. No, the real enemy is your own internal reaction. Ultimate victory, according to this interpretation of Sun Tzu, is achieving a state of internal peace and discipline so incredibly strong that external chaos simply cannot breach your walls. So the next time you find yourself right in the middle of emotional turbulence, I want you to ask yourself, are you frantically fighting to control the relationship, or are you fighting the true battle, which is conquering your own reactions? It's a completely fascinating lens on modern romance, isn't it? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a powerful new framework to think about your next interaction. See you next time.